Hello.
Hello, Jason. How are you?
Hi. How are you feeling?
Good. All right. Thank you.
Um,
And does Brian himself feature in the show at all?
um, that's the problem is I'm gonna have to maybe make some, because yeah, I mean I do understand what you said, the Brian Big Beard show, and then technically I'm not Brian, and I haven't got a beard, so
And your
it's,
beard is not as
no, it's not Brian, it's not
luxuriant.
Brian's level
No.
beard.
All right.
Right, okay then. And now on the Brian Big Beard Show, special guest Will Travers, president of Born Free Foundation. Hello, Will. How are you?
I'm very well. How nice to see you, Jason.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Okay. Um, Now, I know I'm not any sort of ecologist, but what I do know is that the planet that we live on is pretty amazing. And one of the main reasons for this is of all the awesome wild animals. Um, would you better just say which are a few of your favourites?
Jason, I tell you, this is the most extraordinary planet. I mean, it's highly likely that there's nothing like it in our entire solar system. Biodiversity, the number of species that we have, probably more than 8 million species at this point in time, is simply incredible. And I'm always amazed. I mean, I learn something every day. I look at David Attenborough shows on TV and I find out something I never knew. And there's just so much to understand and admire. But the thing is, as I think we all know, so much of our wild heritage is under threat. There was a report out last year in 2020 which indicated that 1.5 million species are now threatened with extinction. And they're not threatened with extinction because they just naturally come to their sell-by date. It's really down to us. I mean, I can't even begin to say how many favourite species I got because I find that a bit speciesist, actually. It sort of makes the other species less important. So for me, all species are super important, right down to, single-celled amoebas.
Okay. Which, with your father, Bill Travers, and your mother, Virginia McKenna, when did you know that caring and protecting animals was going to be your mission in life?
When did I first think that looking after and protecting wildlife would be my mission? Well, gosh, whoever can imagine what their future life will hold? But I tell you what, I was so lucky to go with them to Kenya in 1964 when they actually made the film Born Free, starred in the film Born Free. I was a young boy at the time, 5 years old, had my 6th birthday in Kenya. And I guess it must have sown the seed then because I fell in love with Kenya, with her people, with her wildlife. And obviously COVID doesn't allow us to travel at the moment, but I suppose prior to COVID, I must have been to Kenya 80, 90 times, mainly for work, but also for pleasure because it is such a joyous country to visit. When did I think it was going to be my mission? Well, it certainly wasn't when I was 5 years old. But in 1984, an elephant was euthanized at the London Zoo, and it was an elephant that had been in a film with my parents in the late 60s and then had been gifted by the Kenyan government of the day to London Zoo. And she was put down in 1983, and that triggered something in us as a family and in many people around the world. And we were appalled by the fact that this little elephant, 14 years old, had been on her own for more than 10 years. Well, she'd been on her own for some time, but she'd been at the zoo for more than 10 years. And the fact that she died, the fact that she was gone. So we set up a little tiny organization called ZooCheck. And ZooCheck has just grown and grown. And about 6 years later, 1990, 91, it became the Born Free Foundation. And we've been going from strength to strength ever since, not just with elephants or lions, but with many, many species.
Mm-hmm. Um, are there any particular stories of your mothers or fathers that gave you inspiration? Or that actually answered my question, didn't it?
Well, I can give you more.
I can't.
Do you know what, Mum and Dad? After making Born Free, my father really changed his career path and he started making wildlife documentaries. He still did a bit of acting, with Sidney Poitier, and James Garner. But he actually moved much more into wildlife documentary filmmaking. And, the stories that he told me of his trips to Kenya to sit with George Adamson, the real George Adamson, who released Elsa back into the wild with his wife, Joy Adamson, and sitting there and learning from George about the nature of lions and the absolute imperative to protect wild spaces, that must have inspired me. They also made a film called Ring of Bright Water, which maybe some of our listeners will have seen, about an otter in Scotland, a story written by the famous author Gavin Maxwell. And we moved as a family to Scotland for several months while that film was made. So in a sense, whether it was wildlife documentaries or it was feature films like Ring of Bright Water or An Elephant Called Slowly, I was surrounded by wildlife and wildlife stories from a very early age, and it hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm. With hopefully laws are gradually improving for wild animals all the time. I mean, unless need be, as in rescue or helping an animal back to health and then releasing it back into the wild. I mean, I'm sort of being of the opinion that chimps may. I mean, could they have their own lawyers potentially? Would you agree with that?
I think the whole idea that some of the rights that we accord ourselves as humans should be rights that are available to wild species is right on the forefront of both legal and social thinking. There is an organization in America, it's called the Non-Human Rights Project, and that's looking at whether chimpanzees or elephants should be accorded some of the rights that we currently exclusively give to ourselves under habeas corpus. I think that it is going to become a time. Actually, I tell you, it's interesting that even in ancient Greece, if you killed a dolphin, it was a capital offence. Sorry, I've just got a dog's come in,
That's
so I'm
okay.
going to. Right, dog settle. Right, ready?
Yeah.
Ready. And I think the more we study wild species, the more we understand them, their not just their physical needs, but their psychological and social needs, it becomes almost unavoidable that we accord rights to them. After all, if you've got a companion animal, a dog or a cat, you certainly, I hope, pass on a certain amount of respect and rights to that animal. You wouldn't abuse it or beat it or mistreat it. So I think that if we can expand our circle of compassion, then many other species will be protected in law in a different way, not just from cruelty, but also being given the right to a decent life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is one of your favourite rescued animal stories? Is there one, maybe a funny story that involves a chimp, or?
Well, I have a funny story about one of the animal rescues we did. It's a funny story. It's just sort of an extraordinary story, really, about an elephant. I was contacted out of the blue by somebody in northern Tanzania, the son of a hunter, and he had an elephant in the grounds of his small safari lodge. And he'd actually come to the realization that keeping this female elephant, whose name was Nina, and about 20 years old, on her own in a sort of tennis court sized patch of the grounds was not the right thing to do. But he didn't really know what to do about it. So I contacted a friend of mine, Tony Fitzjohn, who lived in northern Tanzania at the time. And I said, if we manage to get an elephant to you, could you supervise a release program? And he said, I'm absolutely up for it. Let's give it a go. So I borrowed a specialized truck from Kenya. So it had to drive all the way down from Nairobi. That we eventually managed to get Nina into the crate in the back. And then we drove her the 300 miles to Tony's lodge, his camp, and we put her into a walled stockade. to let her sort of settle after this journey and the trauma of it all, because it's obviously not easy. You don't move an elephant every day. And then a day or so later, we thought, well, she's had her 24 hours. We'll just open the gate, and I'm sure she'll start to wander off. She's very friendly with humans, so there was, we didn't think she'd go crazy or anything. And we opened the gate, and she went to the threshold of the gate, and she looked out, and she could have just gone, and there's 2,500 square kilometers of national reserve out there. And she stood there and didn't leave. And she didn't leave for 6 weeks, even though the gate was open all the time, because her life had been defined by her confinement. Mm-hmm. She had only ever been used to something the size of a tennis court. So the opportunity to leave that and to leave the sort of mental security of that was very, very challenging. And then suddenly one day, 6 weeks later, she just went, okay, I'm fine. And off she went. And the great news is that she then hung around where Tony lived, but then went off, met up with wild elephants, found a boyfriend, had a calf, and became a true wild elephant again. So it's one of the most remarkable stories that I can think of. Mm-hmm. I always sort of reflect on the thought that who wouldn't, swap a lifetime in captivity for perhaps a shorter time of freedom.
Yeah. With now focusing on monkeys and chimps, is there a way with Born Free that you can help a chimp? Can you help adopt one, or if yes, how do you do that?
Well, firstly, let me just say that Born Free helps both monkeys and great apes, and great apes include chimps, in 2 different ways. Firstly, in America, our sister organization, Born Free USA, has the biggest primate rescue sanctuary in the United States. It's not for great